Coming up, we're cooking on OGP Monday morning victory vibes. Daniel Jones leads a epic comeback in the second half over the Arizona Cardinals to get the Giants their first win, while it maybe shouldn't have been necessary. We break down all the things that OGP loved about what we saw on the second half Sunday game for Big Blue. Some of the concerns, yes, but ultimately they get on the right track. Let's dive in coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP live on YouTube on a Monday morning where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast, joined as always by the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder, the pulse of the Giants fan base, a man with a plan, the man that can, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir?
What a wild ride yesterday was, my friend. Like
It's
they
a
call it
journey.
Tale of Two Cities. Talk about a tale of two halves, right? I mean, unbelievable change. Whatever happened in that locker room, we need to bottle that up, I think. Right, Adam?
Well, I mean, listen, yeah, we're going to talk about, obviously, we're going to start with the second half because that's where the Giants decided to start playing in this game on Sunday as well. But something shifted, to your point, in that locker room. The coaching staff, Brian Dable, who in the postgame presser said, yeah, I'll keep that in-house. I bet it wasn't, hey, guys, why don't we try a little bit harder? What do you think? But they got the job done ultimately, and it started, as we'll break down, what did not work early in this game, the concerns that we have on the defensive side of the ball. We'll discuss the injury to Saquon Barkley as well. But the Giants are down 20-0. They're outscored 60-0 over the first 6 quarters of football in their NFL season. And then they come out, Andy, and while neither one of us can take, I don't think any Giants fans can take real credit for, oh, this is how I thought the game was going to go. Nobody thought it was going to go like this. But I was very excited, pleased, and elated that in the second half, they did what I thought they should have done to start this game. Open it up. Use the field, use your speed. It's Jalen Hyatt over the top for a massive play. And shockingly, actually caught from behind on that one. I thought, buddy, the bet that we put in, I thought that the anytime touchdown could really have been something there for Jalen Hyatt. But that was the spark that started it all. A perfect ball over the top from Daniel Jones, who really was the catalyst here in the second half.
Yeah, you talk about halftime. One thing they talked to Sterling Shepard. He said, basically everyone looked around the room and said, no matter what happens, we are staying together as a team and we will figure this out together, which is a great thing to hear. It wasn't pointing fingers in the locker room, but, allegedly no fingers were being pointed. But the fact that they said, let's stay together was a huge thing. You could see that there was that idea of like, the offense has got to score points, but more importantly, the defense has to get some stops or else we got no shot in this. And
the team has to be
Adam,
better. Yeah, everything was brutal in the first half, right? It wasn't like you couldn't point fingers because it'd be like, me, you, was it me? Yeah. Oh no, it's everybody. Got it.
Yeah, who played well? Like we gave up 20 points and we didn't score any. Like that's not good on either side of the ball. There is the discussion that Brian Dable had the play sheet over his face. Potentially taking play calling duties from Mike Kafka. In the post game, he did what every good coach does and gives air cover to his team. But I think we all know that Daboll decided to take play calling into his own hands, and it felt like a completely different scheme, completely different mentality, attacking, aggressive, and it was almost out of necessity, right, Adam? Like they didn't have a choice. It wasn't, you can't play conservative anymore. You got to let Daniel Jones go, and you hope that it's going to turn things around, and it did.
Yeah, there was no world. I mean, obviously, right? You're to your point. You're down 20-0. No one is playing well defensively or offensively, but you're also not taking any of those shots. You're not opening things up. And we'll talk about on the back end what the first half looked like for everybody, Daniel Jones included. But in the second half, to your point, if Dable took over the play calling, if it was, hey, I want to see us move this ball, and Kafka just didn't have the confidence in the offensive line or didn't want to take the risk and have this thing turn into, by the way, what we saw the week prior against Dallas, where all of a sudden you're in a blowout that you can't come back from. And ultimately this week it was about playing against a team that does not on paper look like an insurmountable, opposition when it comes to getting back 20 points, taking over a game in a second half. But I mentioned that big 58-yard bomb to Jalen Hyatt to get things rolling. He finishes with 2 for 89, two very big plays. Jump ball down the left sideline where he went up and elevated. Great bounce back performance for him, who only had one chance to make an impact in week 1, and he dropped that ball over the middle. Darren Waller was the chain mover in the second half, 6 for 76. Darius Slayton, just 3 catches, 62 yards, 20.7 yards per catch. He was catching everything. Even the passes that in the first half were a little bit off target and were taking him out of bounds. He was even catching those balls. Like, Darius Slayton was dedicated this offseason, they said, to figuring out how to make himself a reliable receiver for Daniel Jones. He did that as well. It was just real. And by the way, I don't even want to exclude here Isaiah Hodgins, 4 for 40, the chain mover that I think we expect him to be. So you saw the full complement when it came to the passing attack of all of the facets of these skill sets, right? The Darren Wallers and Isaiah Hodgins are supposed to move the chains for you, and then you need the speed to beat teams deep and get big chunk plays. The Giants got that in the second half, and Daniel Jones was surgical in moving that ball around the field.
I could not have been more wrong in terms of the game plan that I thought was going to lead the Giants to victory. I thought it was lean on the offensive line to run block, heavy dose of Saquon Barkley. When you're down 20-0, that script goes out the window, Adam. You can't have 12-minute drives where you're just hoping to, kick a field goal. You have to go, unchained. Everyone has to be going with a sense of urgency, and that's what the Giants did. And man, for everyone that was very upset with how Daniel Jones looked in the first half, and he did not play well. The offensive line didn't play well. Nobody played well on offense. That's what happens when you score 0 points in the first half. For as bad as he looked in the first half, he looked like a top 10 quarterback in the second half. He did everything. He was using his legs effectively. He was getting the ball out. He was not taking unnecessary sacks and hits. He was, you mentioned the word is perfect, surgical. That touchdown pass to Isaiah Hodgins was in the tightest of tight windows, and he made it work. Daniel Jones looked incredible. I could not believe the night and day change there was from the first half to second half, and they needed every single one of those plays to be able to come out on top.
Shout out to everybody who's in on the live chat. Marty, who was here early and often, Legend, Tommy as well, Jersey Life, kicking it in. Yeah, listen, man, a lot of positivities about what we got from Daniel Jones in that second half. And you mentioned, just to really drill down on it, Daniel Jones, 9 rushes for 59 yards and the touchdown, which was on that drive trying to get themselves back into it, exactly what you wanted to see. And if you go back and watch, we'll do this throughout this week, looking back at the positives. They had used it on a previous series where it was the sweeping, moving the line all in one direction, a lead block out in front of Saquon Barkley, and Daniel Jones keeping the football on the second opportunity, where on the first one, they tried to get it out there in front of him. And honestly, man, when you go back and think about it, I said this is what I thought the game script could look like. They didn't get to it until the second half. That's fine. But remember, there was only 7 carries in the first half for Saquon Barkley. The offense just looked sluggish. It looked anemic. And at some point, we'll get into the changes, obviously, with no Andrew Thomas in this one. Azudu gets thrust into a starting role. McCathan gets thrust into a starting role. At some point, you have to just accept that the NFL is built on the big chunk plays. It's built on taking 30, 40, 50 yards at a clip, switching the field position, and giving yourself a chance to get points quickly. And if you can't do that, all of the grind out plays that you want to run, it can still result in punts, right? It can still result in negative gains and in ultimately giving the field position battle away to the opposition. So that's all the things that didn't work in the first half. Daniel Jones finishing line here in this game, 26 of 37, 321 yards, 2 up, 1 down, which last week was his fault with Saquon Barkley. This week, not his fault. That one was on Saquon. Took 3 sacks for just 9 yards, though. A lot of those were keeping near the line of scrimmage. And then the 59 rushing yards to go on the touchdown. Complete game for Daniel Jones. This is what we expected from him coming into this year, right?
Adam, you mentioned Jalen Hyatt. You liked him as the anytime touchdown scorer. That was one thing that you're banging the drum on. He brings a dynamic to this offense that no other wide receiver on the team brings. You look at guys like Slayton and Hodgins and Paris Campbell. They all have their different attributes and skills, in varying degrees. Jalen Hyatt is a game wrecker, over the top touchdown, potential every time he runs a route. And he was like, just throw it up, Daniel. I'm going to go get it. I know I'm faster than these guys. Just get me the ball. It was unbelievable to see him make that catch, 59 yards. It really opened up everything. It felt like from that moment forward, the Arizona Cardinals defense was on their heels, did not know what to expect from the Giants offense. They said, well, now I got to worry about things over the top. Then all of a sudden that opens things up for Waller. Then Saquon Barkley starts to get moving. Then Daniel Jones is using his legs. It felt like Arizona was not comfortable in the second half because the Giants had the full playbook at their disposal. And in the first half, it felt like, well, let's just try to, get a couple yards here or there. No one really had any continuity. Everything changed with Jalen Hyatt out there. And it's crazy to think that a guy that caught 2 balls was the most important factor in that. Obviously, Daniel Jones played well, but without Jalen Hyatt, I don't know if the Giants win that game.
No, you needed to have that explosive playmaking in order to get that defense away from the line of scrimmage and give yourself an opportunity to operate with consistency. Coming up here in a second, we will highlight the Saquon Barkley injury. We will then rewind things back and talk about areas of concern, but make sure that we highlight the positives, which is ultimately the New York Football Giants getting a win, because you can't get to 2 wins until you have 1, and the Giants are now sitting here at 500, obviously with the short week ahead and the San Francisco 49ers on the road. Before we do that, though, friends, I'm going to tell you about our other friends, and that's over at Death Wish Coffee. Guys, you may notice this mug if you're over on YouTube. This is a unique one of 3,000, and I have like 139. So limited press that they do over there, but they also do coffee. You can go over right now and use try DWC20 at deathwishcoffee.com. They've got everything. You can sign up for a subscription program where they'll send you out coffee every single month. They do things from dark roast, medium roast, espresso level coffee, and then they even have, of course, all your traditional things like that little seasonal pumpkin spice that you maybe want to get into your cup. Head over to deathwishcoffee.com right now. Use try DWC20 for 20% off, and maybe, just maybe, get yourself a custom mug. Now, friends, turning our attention, as I've clearly had too much Death Wish coffee this morning, glowingly positive, and I'll just note on the Jalen Hyatt, while the bomb play is, I think, something that we think about in the big picture as being great, I loved the other catch, because that catch was contested. It was stop, turn around, get yourself in position, elevate, get your hands on that ball, bring down a difficult catch there, as opposed to, as great as it is, there's that straight line speed where you get yourself out in front of the defense and you say, I'll see you later. So like it was a really nice sample size. And I expect, by the way, Jalen Hyatt this is going to start to elevate here very quickly in terms of his reps. He needs to get the playbook underneath him. But to your point, you mentioned there, the 1-to-1 of how that took the defense away from the line of scrimmage, how it gave Daniel Jones more time to operate and consider using his legs. This is why I go back and say I thought that that's the method they should have used, because Saquon Barkley, in theory, on paper, is your best player. So then, of course, the defense is going to say, let's be up around the line of scrimmage. Let's put pressure on this weak and suspect offensive line. By getting them off of you, it opened everything up in the second half.
It was an impressive catch, that second catch by Jalen Hyatt. You mentioned it. He turned around, he boxed the guy out, he high pointed the ball. Yep. At no point during that route, when the ball's in the air, are you thinking that anyone has a shot at catching this ball other than Jalen Hyatt. He was aggressive. He got up top. He pulled that thing in. His hands looked rock solid. It was a great catch. It felt like that was the thing the Giants needed. They needed that vertical threat in order to keep Arizona honest. And listen, Adam, when it's 20-7 after Daniel Jones goes in, you're thinking, okay, defense, we need to get a stop here. We have to get a stop because the offense is starting to find something here. Yeah. And what happens? Joshua Dobbs goes down the field, looks like what we thought Daniel Jones could look like, and they go for two, and all of a sudden it's 28-7. You're kind of wondering, was that the missed opportunity to get a stop there? What was your confidence level after, the touchdown by Joshua Dobbs and they go for two, and now the Giants are 21 points down?
Yeah, I do a little bit of live coverage over on PSF. It's a great app. We're in there. You're having a kind of a live watch party. And then by the time the second half came around, I was like, oh, the first touchdown for Daniel Jones. You say, okay, like maybe you're back in it. Now the defense needs to come out and get the stop. And then it just became the pendulum. It became the pendulum watch because every positive drive offensively was then met with something concerning defensively. And the fact that the defense did not have an adjustment ready, did not put forward again, I don't know what Arizona is going to be. We don't know what Joshua Dobbs is going to be. Maybe they are going to be more competitive. You said this leading up to it in our preview, right? Listen, everyone thinks they're tanking and they're going to be absolute disaster, but the players don't feel that way. And you don't know how hard it's going to be on a week-to-week basis. They've now played. We don't know whether or not we or Washington are particularly good, but they've played two teams tough and they've made them grind out wins. I was at the point of being apoplectic around the defensive side of the football. Because when you look over there, you have Noah Ojulari. We understand that. They couldn't have Riley on the roster because they needed to be able to figure out the offensive line. They need to be able to bring up and elevate O'Shane Ximenez. So all these different pieces are working there that make them a little bit limited. But once again, 23 carries for Connor in this game for 106 yards. Joshua Dobbs scampers. He has that one really long run there, which was probably the thing that almost broke me there in this game. But when you give up 4.6 yards per clip, when you give up 151 yards rushing in the game, we're going to get to Kayvon Thibodeaux here in a second. But Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, point of attack, even Bobby Okereke, this was supposed to be the thing that you didn't have to worry about. And we talked about this in the offseason that, yeah, on paper, you've improved and gotten better. But go back to last year. They got gashed by the run a lot defensively, and that carried over in this game. So I had no confidence, Andy, when it was 20-7 and then immediately 28-7. I thought, okay, can the Giants score offensively every single series? It turns out they could. But the defense, even in stopping them in the second half, is still a point of real concern for me coming out of this game.
It is for me too, Adam. That was a big takeaway for me. Is it's like, the offense isn't humming. You're hoping that Wink Martindale and the defense can either stop the run or get pressure, and they did neither of those two things. And that was the big concerning piece. You had Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence off the field in the red zone when the Arizona Cardinals are going in for touchdowns. It was a little bit bizarre on how they were rotating the defensive line and not having two of your best players, two of your highest paid players out there in key critical situations. Adam, it is concerning to me that the Arizona Cardinals offensive line is not necessarily anything that people are writing home about, right? But the Giants got little to no pressure against Joshua Dobbs, and you would expect them to at least make him uncomfortable. And it felt like he kind of had anything that he wanted. He used his legs. James Conner looked good. Some of the short passes out to Hollywood Brown looked good. Yep. The defense has a big question mark. At least we saw the flashes of what the offense can be. I still have tons of concerns on the defensive side of the ball right now.
Yeah, 5 QB hits in this game. No sacks for the New York Football Giants again for the second straight week. We talked about it felt very similar to Dak Prescott, right? There was a couple of moments that, oh, look, when you actually get some pressure in the face of the quarterback, he has to throw it a little bit sooner. You're able to get your hands up. Xavier McKinney came down at one point in this game. Instead of just doing a full sprint at the quarterback, played smart football, situational awareness, got up and batted it down. They had the 7 pass deflections in this game. They had 5 tackles for a loss, but just to your point, the talent level is not commiserate with what and I'm sorry, I'm reading this thing completely backwards here. 3 pass deflections for the Giants. If you want to know who had 7, it was the Cardinals, and 6 QB hits across this one here. Had some tackles for a loss, but just the talent level tells you that you should be able to dictate terms defensively. And even if the Giants scored no points, and the difference here was, I will say, and I talked about this in game, when the Giants offensively were giving you nothing in the first half, the Arizona Cardinals did what the Cowboys didn't do in week 1. They controlled the game clock. They had over 20 minutes, almost 19 plus minutes of possession in the first half. So I knew that there's going to be a world here where they grind you down and they get you worn out and you're a little bit thin. But it is concerning. And we get to the player here that I think is the most concerning probably from Sunday, and that's Kayvon Thibodeaux. You are a top 5 NFL pick. You are supposed to be a game wrecker. You're supposed to be a guy that even if there's nobody else on the defense, you go and make plays with consistency. I wasn't saying his name a lot. That's a problem because it means that he's not making plays and he's not showing the versatility that we thought he would coming out of the draft. Now in year number 2, by the way.
Adam, it wasn't like Dobbs wasn't throwing the ball either. Like, if he only threw 13 passes, you may say, like, oh, they were just focused on the run game. There wasn't that many opportunities. He dropped back. He threw the ball 31 times. Like, he was back there, and it felt like the Giants weren't getting any pressure. And yes, there was not anyone on the other side. Azeez Ojulari out again with another injury. There wasn't really that pass rush from the other side, which meant that they could focus a little bit more on Kayvon Thibodeaux. But the whole point is, everybody game plans for these game wreckers.
Right.
Look at Micah Parsons. They know where he is on the field at all times, and he still wreaks havoc with sacks and strip fumbles and tackles in the backfield. What is your level of concern with Kayvon not being able to get any pressures, any sacks through 2 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, not to compare him to a guy that's been in the league a little bit longer and Micah Parsons, but when you watch Micah Parsons play, and it's not a one-to-one position, but you just see it, right? Micah Parsons is a game wrecker. Micah Parsons is the guy who, by the way, Andy Makowitz, that was top of his list. He said, I don't care if they say there's character issues, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. That's the guy that Andy wanted in that draft class, as a lot of Giants fans did. But when you watch him, he's the first guy you see when you watch the defense. Kayvon Thibodeaux right now is just one of, right? And I think my biggest concern with him would be, and we talked about this when he was drafted, when he gets in the NFL game, you go, that looks a little bit smaller than I maybe anticipated. But if he's fast enough, is he quick enough, if he's versatile enough, then you can see him get used in a lot of different ways. We saw situations on Sunday where he was dropping back into coverage areas, but oftentimes he had his back half turned to the line of scrimmage because he was still trying to get to the point of coverage before looking to make those plays. Listen, I think that ultimately he will come along, but we may have to look at him as being the high-end player in a complementary system of defensive football, as opposed to the Michael Strahan game wrecker of old that we want to have on that defensive front for Big Blue.
Yeah, the problem is that's not where you drafted him, and that's not what it's set up for, right? Like, he's supposed
Yep.
to be that high impact player, and maybe you're right. Maybe we need to temper expectations on what he can be this season, Adam, because it doesn't look like he's going to be a double digit sack guy. But now you got to kind of sit back and say, well, if he's not able to beat guys one on one all on his own, how are we going to get pressure on their quarterback? Because we have to change up this game plan now if he can't do that. You're going to have to use Isaiah Simmons in different ways. You're going to have to hope Azeez Ojulari comes back and he can add some pressure to the outside. It changes and the way that Wink Martindale wants to apply pressure, knowing that we can't just have him pin his ears back and get to the quarterback.
Whole bunch of positives, handful of negatives. We're going to come back in a second here and give a couple more positive takeaways from this game, like the offensive line and a lot of young players out there. Maybe still some concerns for some of them as well. And then obviously the Saquon Barkley injury. Did we dodge a very, very concerning situation? But with a short week, what are expectations for Big Blue? Before we do that, though, remind you about our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Go to FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel.com/promotions, because you got a lot of different options over here. You can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets for first-time customers. That's an easy one. You also have the Gronk profit spike, where you're going to get unique opportunities to go ahead and get some 3+ leg same game parlays, Andy. That's one of my favorites. And then you're also going to get opportunities like on Thursday Night Football for the no sweat same game parlay, Giants versus San Francisco. It's all over there on FanDuel. You can also do any of the games, props, and everything else that you want to get into. But you go to sportsbook.fanduel.com/promotions and see all of the great opportunities that you can take advantage of. It is certainly an opportunity that I did not succeed in this past Sunday. But when we think about now, let's just, as there's one more good comment here that I saw coming in over on the YouTube live stream, something we're going to try to do here, obviously, as we go throughout the course of the season. You got to remember that on that defensive side of the ball, too, Bobby Okereke made some plays later in this game. There was about 2.5 to 3 quarters where I was doing a similar thing I've done with linebackers of the past, going, so this is the starting linebacker, you say. Like, the stability that he's supposed to bring to this defensive unit, I don't know which it is. That Micah McFadden, who's flying around like crazy, but I don't know if he's positionally always doing the right thing. You don't really have any other linebackers to speak of that you're putting out there with consistency. I thought Okereke was going to be this stabilizing force. And again, just like with Kayvon Thibodeaux, just like with Dexter Lawrence, I keep coming back to, wow, through 2 games, I am not seeing players that had a certain bar of expectation come anywhere near meeting those.
Adam, it was strange to see that. I thought he was going to be, he played okay in the second half. I thought he asserted himself. He was a tackling machine. Like, when a guy was near him, he made sure to wrap him up and take him down. Well, I do want to say, on the positive front, Jason Pinnock was awesome yesterday for the Giants.
Give us a dose of positivity.
When we talk about the positive side of things, 10 solo tackles, 13 total tackles, 3 pass deflections. It felt like when Wink Martindale was dialing up pressure because Kayvon wasn't getting it, he's like, I got to find someone that can get it. And it was a mix of Xavier McKinney trying to get up there. Obviously, he had one of those concerning penalties on the run. Jason Pinnock was great, and the Giants really found something in him. It's one of the reasons why Julian Love is now in Seattle. kudos to Jason Pinnock for stepping up when we needed someone. It felt like he was all over the field making plays for the Giants.
100%. Yeah. And that is really like there are these little moments where we say, and I think so far we'd say that Deonte Banks and Trey Hawkins, they've held up. There's been times when Hawkins trailed a little bit, right? So, some moments you want to see cleaned up, but I'll keep coming back to the idea. I'm not going to look at the rookies first, even the first round rookies. I'm not looking at them first when I'm thinking about problems when we expect this defensive front to be putting pressure on the opposition so those guys can play a little bit more attacking style football. And there was even a great play where Deonte early in this game played very physically on the outside, arguably maybe penalty worthy physically, but I'm fine with that. Like the dude plays with confidence. And listen, if you're not going to throw the flag, then I'm going to keep going at this dude because that's a part of his game. Other positive then, before we talk about Saquon's injury here, and this will dovetail a little bit negative too, the offensive line. So no Andrew Thomas in this game, obviously, and the Giants shuffle. And it really made a lot of sense when you think about it. Now, Matt Peart's been the backup swing tackle, but we said last episode coming into this game, Ezeudu, this was big picture we were talking, Ezeudu has tackle experience going back to college. And if you just think about the best way to get the best collection of players into the line, it makes sense that Ezeudu goes to left tackle. You go ahead and you get McKathan in the line on the right guard spot. And then, unfortunately, we have another injury in this one that happens to our rookie Smith Jr. So then Bredesen gets brought in. He also has a bit of a problem. The offensive line held up well against what we think is a subpar defense, but they did, listen, you can't put up 31 points in the second half without having consistent play in front of Daniel Jones. They did that. So give the kudos, but also we're like a walking wounded of who knows whatery as we look forward to this short week, which we'll get into, later on.
At some point during the game, I was like squinting to see who was on the line. Like who's playing right guard right now? Who's our center? Like, and you see, and then all of a sudden they pan to Ben Bredesen like on the cart going back and away, and you're like, man, we're already down a couple people. We're shifting things up. He was supposed to be relatively consistent. Now everybody's moving around. McKathan's over here. John Michael Schmitz is there. Glowinski shows up. Oh, yeah. And Adam, if we're going to talk about the negatives, well, let's talk about the positive. You're right.
Yeah, Joshua Ezeudu, positive.
Joshua Ezeudu, I think, showed that he is, when Andrew Thomas is healthy, Ezeudu is a swing tackle for the Giants. It's not Matt Peart. It's Joshua Ezeudu, in my opinion. I feel like the more comfortable he gets, the more I could see him playing well. McKathan was decent for the Giants. Mark Glowinski coming in immediately could not stop anyone from doing anything. And you're like, man, we got to trot him back out here. This is not good. And Evan Neal did not look great again. There's a couple videos of like Daniel Jones dropping back to pass and Evan Neal's just standing there, not chipping or blocking anyone. He's looking left. He's looking right. He's like, I don't have a man to block. It's like, well, you better find someone to block because that's a problem. If you're standing,
guys, good news. Good news. I don't have to do anything on this one. There's nobody for me to block. It's going to be fine.
Guys, great news. No one's around me, so I can't give up a sack. And he kind of just stood there with his hands out like this, looking around. It's like, no, you got to go find someone. You got to go chip someone, help somebody else out. It didn't look good, Adam, but you know what? It looked a little bit different than what it did against the Cowboys. Obviously, the Cowboys pass rush is a little bit different than the Arizona Cardinals, but I saw a little bit of like, okay, if we get even just like a hint of mediocre offensive line play, look at what's possible for this offense. It helped Saquon Barkley. It helped Daniel Jones. It helped everyone out. So one of the positives is while we're shifting around and getting injuries, it did seem like the offensive line played marginally better than they did on Sunday night.
Yeah, I think it was a good sample size you mentioned from Ezeudu. I think even McKathan right now, he's a guy, and I was in some of the Twitter spaces ahead of this game and talking about, expectations and, now is this a good or bad sign that the Giants are going to a guy like McKathan? And it was a good reminder. I knew it, but it's easy to forget. He was on the PUP list and he had injuries and he had to come back from that. So even though he's in year number 2, this is the first chance to see, well, where would they have wanted him to be? Regardless of draft, right? With the word was the Giants were high on McKathan. So now that I think the question for me becomes, and you talk about Evan Neal and his continued struggles. When we were coming into this last week, big picture, okay, do you move Evan Neal out of tackle? Well, I think you're going to give him every chance to succeed or fail there. Depending on how you view this season and wanting it to be a success and wanting to see growth, it has to at least be open over the next couple of weeks to be watching Evan Neal with a critical eye and saying, if Ezeudu played strong enough, what is the version of this offensive line where he is in the starting rotation and where McKathan is in the starting rotation because Glowinski is an absolute disaster? Does Evan Neal kick inside at some point? What is the best version of this team on the offensive line? I think you have to be open to that, but it's all going to depend on the injuries, obviously, with Smith Jr., and whether or not the Giants think that this is a Bobby Johnson issue or if this is an Evan Neal issue, if we're talking specifically on the high draft pick, right? Is this a technique thing, developmental thing? Is it because you were playing left tackle at college and we put you over to right tackle because we already had our left tackle, and should we have been drafting a left tackle to go play at right tackle? There's a lot. There's things that you could look at that can be organizationally a mistake in the way they went about this. So he becomes really fascinating to watch, but obviously we'll get into that a little bit more here in the next couple of episodes this week. Looking at the film, where do they succeed or fail? And do we think that Ezeudu and McKathan should be in these rotations? Go ahead.
Adam, there's an interesting conversation going on YouTube Live right now. One of the things is the front seven can't get pressure due to poor play calling. Tommy, I think that's an interesting one. Tommy goes on to talk about saying, like, we've got the linebacker 7 yards off the ball. And so how are we going to actually stuff the run when this is the setup that we have? You can't just rely on the defensive line. The linebackers have to be in there to be helping them to be able to get closer to the line of scrimmage to stop them, right?
And we'll talk about this throughout this week here. Remember, when we looked at those couple of freeze frames from last week's game against Dallas, what was it? On those critical down and distances, the Giants, whether the linebackers that were dropping back into coverage, whether it was the cornerbacks being lost and losing 2 or 3 yards of distance on the receivers, when you have a 5 yards to gain and you're not there until the 7th yard, guess what? That's first down territory. And I, on the one hand, agree with Tommy when we talk about this linebacking core, but I'm going to go back to just the one part about it, that the stuffing of the run is supposed to be starting up front. Bobby Okereke is supposed to be the missile that cleans it up, as is Micah McFadden, as is the safety group. Now, it doesn't excuse any of them, and this is the part that we mentioned coming into it, and we'll continue to talk about defensively. Wink Martindale likes to run an aggressive defensive scheme, but is he running a complex, versatile scheme? And I mean that he should be. Or is he saying, see your man, beat your man? And the opposing offenses are going, we'll chip you, we'll block you, we'll get you out of our way, and we'll create these seams.
The biggest issue, and it was noticeable that the linebackers were not playing up at the line, stopping the run. But Adam, 100%. I think it also has to do with the cornerback play. You have 2 rookie corners that are sitting out there, and Wink's saying, I can't just leave them out on an island. I'd be doing a disservice. And so all of a sudden we get into this in between where the linebackers aren't stuffing the run. They're trying to help the rookies on the outside. And that allows 150 yards rushing for the Arizona Cardinals. The bigger problem too is at that point, we're not getting any pressure. Basham wasn't getting any pressure. Ximenez wasn't getting pressure. Kayvon wasn't getting pressure. So now Wink Martindale's in this weird spot where it's like, I can't get pressure. If I bring the linebackers up, then I'm leaving the rookie cornerbacks exposed. If I drop them back, we're not stopping the run. It felt like he didn't have the right answers for these questions.
And by the way, to your point about that, it's like the other problem you're going to run into here is the personnel at the linebacker level. And it's why Isaiah Simmons was in there. And by the way, tip of the hat to him on after the Giants had the lead and it was about shutting down those final few seconds. I know it's such a little footnote. He made the tackle on the special teams kickoff. He shut down that return very quickly. And you saw just a little bit of an exuberant burst from him. Those are the moments you need. I think that they want to see him more inside of that linebacker package and showing some of that. Because remember, Okereke and McFadden, they're not drop back into zone linebackers. So when you want to help your cornerbacks and you're using guys that aren't really suited for that, I think you're right. Like Wink's defenses want to leave the corners on an island, and it's hard to do that because they're rookies. But if you don't do that, then you're giving up and sacrificing what you can do against the run game. So I think that the defense very much is still trying to figure out what they want to be. Before we get out of here, and guess what, guys? We got a lot to talk about, as you can tell. And we're going to be doing all week long here, breaking down what we saw from the defense, where we think they can improve. There obviously was also setting up for that game-winning field goal, just a little scamper inside for one Saquon Barkley. He gets his ankle rolled up on. Jordan Renan said coming out last night that Saquon Barkley's x-ray was negative. There was some swelling, but not believed to be a fracture. Initial thinking, according to a source, was it's an ordinary sprain, still not a good thing, rather than a high ankle sprain. The MRI this morning in Arizona to determine the severity and potential time missed. Listen, little reality check when, again, running backs and paying them and health, and Saquon has that too. It looks like we avoided a big scare with him. But again, coming out of this game, I'm going to tell you, I know people want to say you got to lean on the running game. this is a passing offense. They're going to win games based on what they did in the second half against the Arizona Cardinals. You're going to need and want Saquon Barkley to be a part of this, but it'll be interesting to see. I don't see any world where he's playing on Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, it was tough because even on that last drive, you could see Saquon was willing the team
Yeah.
to get extra yards. He was
Yep.
running hard. He looked great. It's why you want someone like Saquon Barkley in the backfield. Unfortunate that one or two plays right before they kicked the field goal, obviously he gets kind of caught up and it looked very awkward. Adam, listen, on a short week with the 40, going to San Francisco on Thursday, I would be shocked if Saquon plays in this game. I think the best bet is going to have him sit out. It does put a little bit of a damper on, an otherwise historic comeback that the Giants had since 1949. They haven't come back from 21 plus. They did it in this game using Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. It's unfortunate to not have him. Now you wonder, are they going to keep Andrew Thomas out too? And now all of a sudden Daniel Jones is without his Pro Bowl left tackle and his all-world type running back. That feels like a really, really tough hill to climb on a short week for the Giants.
Yeah, and I do wonder how the Giants approach this and safeguarding against. Listen, they're on the schedule. You want to go play them. You want to go get a win. But how much caution will be executed, knowing you have 10 days coming out of that, not just for Thomas, not just for Barkley, for a lot of guys. Unlike week one, if this thing gets out of hand early, I think that the Giants need to be very prudent about who they have out there and who are they putting at risk, especially we think across that offensive line where we have multiple injury concerns already thin at that position. We close out here, my friends, at the end of the day. And maybe we'll stick around after the official episode just to say hi to everybody and because we appreciate everyone being in on the conversation here. A friendly reminder, this one comes from friend of the show, Boomer Esiason. Daniel Jones is the first player in Giants history with 250 passing yards, 50 rushing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown in a single game. He did this in the second half alone on Sunday. The only other player to do this in a half since 2000 was Michael Vick at Washington in 2010. Daniel Jones, at the end of the day, is a dual threat quarterback. And whether it's Mike Kafka or now Brian Daboll taking over, they need to remember and every single game remind themselves that while we think about Saquon Barkley as being the best player maybe on the Giants team, Daniel Jones is the one that's going to win you football games. And that's what he showed you in week number 2 in the second half here. That's why we think he was paid. That's why you have him as the, quote, franchise quarterback now. He executed. He led this team to a win when the offensive line was okay and the running game was lackluster at best. Daniel Jones won that game, and that's what you're going to need in the matchups where you feel like you are the better team on paper, a franchise quarterback leading the way.
He had a 79.1 QBR, and that is with the interception that we can kind of credit to going through Saquon Barkley's hands. That would put him third in QBR in the entire league. We know what he's capable of and what level he can play at. I think we're starting to realize that he has to play at that level more often than not because the surrounding pieces of not having your left tackle or your running back in the offensive line and now defensive questions about how we can stop the run, Daniel Jones is going to have to play like a top 5 quarterback in the league for this team to pull out some of these games where they're going to be an underdog.
Yep. And honestly, and we know that I can be a guy that wants to look at the other side of the coin every single opportunity. I don't care what Arizona is or is not. They were in front of you. You had to go play them. You had to win the game to not be 0-2. They went ahead and they did that. Throughout this week, we're going to talk about injury updates. We're going to talk about the performance from Daniel Jones and how we carry that over and adjustments that we want to see. More Jalen Hyatt being chief among them for this offensive side of the ball. Thank you to everybody that came in here. We'll stick around for a few minutes. I'm not sure what Andy's schedule is, so we'll see. We'll hang out for a little bit here, though. Appreciate everyone being in there, including Tommy, who, by the way, follow his lead. If you're in the chat, come on, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, be a part of the conversation, man, as we roll along. As Andrew Makowitz, though, until next time, would want, nay, need, and demand the people know. As always,
let's go Big Blue.
That was a weird one. I cut the exit theme music short there so we can have a little bit extra conversation. If you're in here, we're doing our live shows, try to keep it tight. But Andy, you were keeping an eye on the chat. Any other nice nuggets there that fans were bringing up?
Well, the one thing that I wanted to talk about that we didn't get to on the show was the struggles of Paris Campbell were apparent in terms of dropping balls and not being an explosive player. That was surprising to me. It's going
Yeah.
to be interesting with Wan'Dale Robinson coming back and Jalen Hyatt starting to ascend on the outside. Who's the odd man out? It doesn't look like it's going to be Slayton. Doesn't look like it's going to be Hodgins. To
No.
me, based on what you're seeing, are you agreement, Adam, that Paris Campbell might be the guy that is the casualty as a result?
We saw them on the sideline, him and Daniel Jones sitting there with the iPad, and it was mostly Paris Campbell talking to Daniel Jones. And I don't mean that this is a negative on one side or the other, but it was a lot of like, it seemed like Paris Campbell was saying like, they're doing this, and that's why I'm doing this, and that's why the ball should be here, the ball should be there, right? And I don't discredit that. You want the communication. He's been in the league. Also, though, I think that it needs to be, if you could be the fly on that pad, it should really be, what are you seeing, Daniel? Where should I be? How do I get myself in the good spot? Where are you looking to throw the ball? I don't know if that's the discussion that's happening here, but to your point, yeah, I said this. We said this coming into the year. I said that Wan'Dale Robinson was my sleeper for this season for the New York Football Giants. Once he gets back on the field, and yes, knock on wood that he can stay healthy, he's the exact complementary type of player that you want to have with Jalen Hyatt, with Waller, with Hodgins, with Slayton. And to your point, we saw the results from everybody else offensively in that second half, from Waller to Hodgins to Darius Slayton, and obviously from Hyatt. We did not see it from Paris Campbell. And I just wonder if we're looking at a player that maybe is just, hey, yeah, high draft stock, injuries, could never quite get there. I don't know. And real quick, man, everybody was talking about this. It's like, well, all the moves you made in the offseason, this was the all-in stuff. You brought in Paris Campbell. Go look, do what Andy says. Follow the money. This was not a heavy investment in Paris Campbell. It was a just in case Wan'Dale Robinson isn't ready, and just in case Sterling Shepard isn't going to be a version of himself that he's been before.
Yeah, and think about the structure of the Giants on the offensive line. Obviously, you would love to get two tight ends there to be able to have Bellinger on the field. But when you start
Yes.
thinking about trying to get weapons on the field for Daniel Jones, you can't take Isaiah Hodgins off the field. It's tough. You can't take Darius Slayton after the way that he's been performing. It almost feels like with the offensive line trouble, you want to keep two tight ends in, but you want to get Wan'Dale Robinson on the field. You want to get Jalen Hyatt on the field. You have to figure out who's going to be the odd man out in three wide receiver sets. Maybe it's going to be complementary, but I'm like I said, I'm circling Paris Campbell's snap count, thinking that you got to get Jalen Hyatt more reps, and Wan'Dale Robinson is a draft pick from this organization, a high draft pick at that.
Yeah, and I think the Hodgins performance in week 2 matters, right? Because week number 1, both he and Darius Slayton, nothing doing, right? And the weather, the this, the that, the other. Okay, all great. So now, but can they build off of that? And listen, this game against the 49ers is going to be absolutely brutal to try to figure out. But if you're going to look at that and say, what can we do? Win or lose the game, Hodgins, can you duplicate a 3 for 35, 40 yards? Darius Slayton, can you get a couple of those big catches? And I'll close out on this, and we'll get out the door here, and we'll probably put this out a little bit of bonus. The other thing we didn't talk about was in the first half and what Daniel Jones wasn't doing well, right? There was a deep bomb play for Darius Slayton that would have been maybe a walk-in touchdown, but he underthrew him by about a good 5 yards, and Slayton had to slow down. There was to Paris Campbell, if we want to give him, a one-moment excuse, the quick drop and slant to the outside, and Daniel Jones fired it high and in front of him, didn't get it into his hands to allow him to be shifty. These things happened in the first half. The Barkley one, watched it in real time, thought, again, Daniel Jones makes it. Nope. Hits Barkley in the face and ends up being intercepted, right? So there were all of these things that he corrected in a great way. And on Paris Campbell and on Hodgins, I think it is situational. I'll be curious, like, if we think that Slayton is plugged in, and obviously Waller is, and Hyatt's growing and Wan'Dale's coming, I do wonder, can the Giants offensively thrive if they have two somewhat position-dependent players in Hodgins and Slayton? They showed it against Arizona. Can you show it against the defenses that are better around the league? And that's when the shiftiness matters here. So it's fascinating to watch, man. I would love to hear that Wan'Dale Robinson is coming along, because that'll clarify the pecking order, right?
What's also interesting, and we'll get out of here after this one, but with the Saquon Barkley injury, do you see Paris Campbell in the backfield? Do you see Wan'Dale Robinson in the backfield? Do you see a way to get all of these weapons on the field at the same time? It may not look like we're pounding it up the middle with Matt Breida 27 times. It might be, how do we give the illusion of these quick out routes and these little, screens or reverses just to be able to keep the defense honest, Adam?
And don't forget, by the way, there were plays when Daniel Bellinger was lined up behind Daniel Jones, and then they had Gary Brightwell lined up to the right and Barkley to the left, and they created this sweeping wall to try to get some yards for Barkley. They did that again, and they had Isaiah Hodgins plugged into that position behind Daniel Jones. So they were trying to get creative about finding ways to manufacture some blocking. I think it speaks a little bit to where maybe Bellinger is in terms of his blocking abilities and trying to get it figured out. It's a grab bag. Cager's not that guy. So the Giants know with the offensive line play, like to your point, we got to find a way to manufacture these opportunities and maybe to manipulate defenses into thinking that we still want to try to do that. And then we go deep and then we go bomb and then we just live with those results all week long, man. We're going to be doing this. Really, thanks to everybody that came in here. We'll be back again, if not tomorrow, by Wednesday. By Wednesday, we're going to take a look at the film. We're going to break down snap counts. We're going to update injuries on that offensive line. We now have 3 offensive linemen to keep an eye on, and they are considered to be 3 of the better ones across this front with Thomas, Bredesen, and Smith Jr. We'll cover all that and so much more as we look ahead to the short week. Thursday night, it's already here, Andy, and we'll also discuss all of our picks from the weekend as well. We will catch you guys next time. Follow us on social at Adam Armbrecht, at AndyMac214, at One Giant Podcast on Twitter, and of course, here on YouTube, and we're going to get those podcast needs fulfilled. I'm back. Ha! Surprise. Quietly and quickly, as the people would want, need, and demand to know from you. I got to get this figured out. This is the second time I can't get there.
Well, as always, Adam, let's go Big Blue.